the Glomar Explorer. Sometimes called the GSF Explorer, or originally it was known as the USNS Hughes Glomar Explorer. It was a deep-sea drill ship platform that was constructed in 1971 and 1972 by the Sun Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company, at the specific direction of one Howard Hughes. The ship was an insane project with incredible lifting potential. At the time, it cost $350 million. In today's money, that's $1.5 billion. When the media asked Hughes, why he was building such an insano ship, he explained that it was meant to extract manganese nodules from the ocean floor. That was a lie. That's not actually what it was for at all, but it became surprisingly influential, causing many others to examine the idea of doing that. In reality, this ship was actually developed specifically at the request of the CIA. See, on the 8th of March 1968, K-129, a Soviet diesel-electric submarine, sank in the Pacific Ocean, 1,560 miles northwest of Hawaii. She was discovered by the USS Halibut, and the CIA was interested in recovering the submarine for intelligence-gathering purposes. It was in the middle of the Cold War, after all. But the K-129 had sunk in extremely deep water, at a depth of about 16,500 feet, 3 miles down, or 5 kilometers. This wasn't the sort of situation where you could just lift it up casually. You needed something huge, with a tremendous amount of power, in order to pull this thing that distance from the ocean floor. And they needed a cover story, since such a large ship would be easily detected by the Soviets, who, if they knew what they were doing, would absolutely try to stop them. The endeavor was codenamed Project Azorian, though that name didn't become public until 2010. Originally, the press reported on it as Project Jennifer. In 1974, the Explorer recovered a portion of the K-129, but as the section was being lifted to the surface, a mechanical failure in the grapple caused about 2/3 of it to break off. That lost section is believed to have held many of the most sought items, like the codebook and the nuclear missiles. But the recovered section did hold 2 nuclear-tipped torpedoes and some cryptographic machines, as well as the bodies of 6 Soviet submariners. They were given a formal, filmed burial at sea. Still, pulling anything up from that depth was a tremendous achievement, and the lifting capacity of the Explorer was not to be questioned, but unfortunately, she was a bit of a flawed design. Not in terms of what she could do, but in terms of how useful that was going to be. There just wasn't that much use for a ship with her unique attributes. They did attempt to lease her, though, and her last owners weren't the Navy. Initially, between 1996 and 1998, she was leased to Global Mining Drilling. However, they would merge with Santa Fe International Corporation to become Global Santa Fe Corporation, and later they merged with Transocean in November of 2007 to become just Transocean. Transocean wind up just straight up buying the Explorer in 2010 for $15 million. That's $18 million nowadays. And actually got substantial use out of her. Crew members fondly referred to her as the mothership due to her great size. But sadly, in April of 2015, Transocean announced the ship would be scrapped, and she was broken up in June of that year. The Baron of Renfrew? Is that what? Give me a second. Yeah, Renfrew. Okay. Honestly, I expected it to be pronounced really weirdly, but it really is spoken phonetically, so that's good. This was a 4-masted bark, wooden sailing ship built in 1825 by Charles Wood in Quebec, Canada. She was actually one of the largest wooden ships ever built, and looking at her, you might not think she's a mad science experiment at all. Like, what's so weird about that? She's just a wooden sailing ship. You don't understand, okay? You don't understand how weird this concept is. This is a disposable ship. What? Let me try to explain this. She actually followed the construction of a similar disposable ship called the Columbus, but the Renfrew is way more interesting to me as she was a complete failure. The whole point of these types of ships was that they were supposed to transport timber from North America to Europe and be disassembled after taking the timber cargo off, as the ship itself was also made of timber, so they could use the wood from the ship too. Why would they do this? Well, it was because, at the time, there were very high taxes on imported timber. It was stagnating the industry. So as a way to get around that, it would basically make it so the ship would be taken apart too, and sold as timber. The ship itself couldn't be taxed under the laws of the time, because, well, it was the ship. So, with that context, it actually kind of makes sense why they were doing this. She sailed one time, though, on August 23rd, 1825, under the command of Captain Matthew Walker. She left Quebec with a crew of 25 men and a cargo of 9,000 tons of timber. Whether or not that number includes the weight of the ship herself is still debated on. But the point is there was a lot of timber there. She was bound for London, England. We know she definitely started breaking apart on the voyage. She wasn't made to last, and apparently couldn't last the trip across the Atlantic at all, which is the one trip she was supposed to last for. On the 21st of October that same year, her crew left her off the coast of Gravelines, and apparently she wound up breaking in 3 parts that were eventually found near Calais, all off the coast of France. So she almost made it, but still didn't. And disposable ships stopped being a thing pretty soon after. There was a later change in timber tax laws that wound up including these disposable ships in the kind of timber that would be taxed. So there really was no point in building them anymore. And even if there was, they should probably build them a little bit better. Like, not to break apart before they get to where they're going. That's all I'm trying to say. The HMS Zubian. Now, much like the last one, this one at the surface doesn't look that crazy or mad sciencey, but this one actually might be the most literal interpretation of a ship created by Dr. Frankenstein. It was commissioned on the 7th of June, 1917, as the unexpected, misfit, outcast, 13th member of the Royal Navy's Tribal Class, or F Class, of destroyers. Why is she so weird? What makes her special? Well, that's because she, first of all, was never supposed to be a thing. Zubian was not actually built from the ground up. See, Zubian is a portmanteau of 2 other names of tribal class destroyers, HMS Zulu and HMS Nubian. Zubian is literally a combination of 2 of her sisters. What happened was, in late 1916, the Nubian and the Zulu were very badly damaged by German attacks in the English Channel. Nubian had her bow destroyed by a torpedo from a German torpedo boat on the 27th of October in the Battle of Dover Strait. Zulu had her stern blown off by a mine in the channel on the 8th of November. Interestingly, both wound up staying afloat despite being effectively blown in half, and were eventually towed to the Chatham dockyard. Under normal circumstances, these 2 would have just been scrapped. There was really no reason to rebuild them because, well, they'd lost half of them. The amount of money it would take to fix them would be better spent on a brand new ship. But it was the middle of World War I, and the Admiralty looked at them and realized, well, they've each lost the opposite half. Let's just stick them together. And that's exactly what they did. The 4 parts of Zulu were welded to the stern of Nubian. The end result only had about 3.5 inches, 89 millimeters difference in beam. Zubian came into being. The first thing she ever did was confuse the heck out of the German Imperial Admiralty, because they didn't know that a Zubian was being constructed. And technically, she never was. She was just kind of slapped together. But she served faithfully during the last years of World War I. She joined the 6th Flotilla, and during that period, she rotated through nighttime patrols of the Dover Strait. While doing that on the 4th of February in 1918, she actually sank a U-boat, UC-50. She also participated in the first Ostend raid on the night of the 23rd, 24th of April. Despite being quite literally a Frankenstein's monster of a ship, the Zubian did well, extremely well, but not well enough to last past the war. She was completely worn out by the time the conflict was over, and to be fair, she was built out of used components from the get-go. She was sold for scrapping and broken up by December of 1919, which is a shame because if you preserved her as a museum ship, you could argue that she's kind of preserving 3 ships. Herself, plus the Zulu, plus the Nubian. I mean, technically, sort of, no, whatever, I like her. We like the Zubian here, okay? The RP Flip, which stands for Floating Instrument Platform, is an open ocean research platform owned by the U.S. Office of Naval Research, or ONR. Now, looking at this picture, you're probably like, that's not a ship though. That's clearly a stationary platform. Here, take a look at this. You see it now? This is nuts. Absolutely absurd. I love it. Peak mad science going on here. The platform is 108 meters, 355 feet long, and it's designed to partially flood and pitch backward 90 degrees, which results in only the front, 17 meters, 55 feet of the platform, pointing up out of the water. It's like half a submarine, sort of. It's so bizarre. The bulkheads become the decks in this format, and when she's flipped, most of the ballast for the platform is provided by water at depths below the influence of surface waves. This keeps her very stable and mostly immune to wave action, very similar to a spar buoy. When she's done, compressed air is pumped into the ballast tanks in the flooded section, and the platform, which itself actually has no propulsion, returns to its horizontal position, so it can be towed to a new location. She's so bizarre that she's actually frequently mistaken for a capsized ocean transport ship. And as I just said, technically you can't call her a ship because she can't move under any power of her own. She's effectively a barge, a really weird barge. But I couldn't resist talking about this because, yo, what the heck? But the ONR has gotten significant use out of this setup. With her ability to actually, be moved around, it means they can use her for research in all sorts of different locations. Stable research to keep the workers safe. She's still in operation to this day, and has a complement of 5 crew and 11 researchers. She's meant to study wave height, acoustic signals, water temperature and density, and for the collection of meteorological data. Because of her working with acoustics, that's why she has no means of propulsion. She could be given an engine, technically. Because they want to minimize residual sounds, no engine was installed. Even some of her indoor furniture is specially designed to do what she does. The toilet seats, for example, can flip 90 degrees, as can the shower heads. And there are overhead lights installed on the surfaces that become the ceilings in both towing and flipped orientations. She's such a unique piece of equipment, but again, very interesting and very good at what she's for. So more power to her, I say. The Ramform Titan. This ship is a marine seismic acquisition vessel built by the MHI shipyard in Nagasaki, Japan in 2013. So this is a fairly new ship. It's sometimes called the widest ship in the world at the waterline, as her width at the stern is 70 meters, 230 feet. At the moment, she's operated by a Norwegian company, Petroleum Geoservices, or PGS, who use her for 3D seismic data acquisition. PGS has actually wound up building 4 of the Titan classes. The second ship is Ramform Atlas, the third is Ramform Hyperion, and the fourth is Ramform Tethys. These are all fantastic names, by the way. And I don't just call them mad science experiments because of their peculiar design. That's not the only reason. For one thing, the reason they were built in such a weird way was to make them as stable as possible in any weather, to keep the crew safe, even if they had to work in the middle of a storm. These vessels are also capable of running survey streams behind them, 24 of them in total, that could span well over 100 kilometers. In fact, they broke a world record for this in 2015 when they ran 129.6 kilometers of streamers during one of their surveys. And yet, that's still not the most insane thing about them. All the stuff the ship does requires a lot of power to do it. That makes sense. Her engine is a little bit nonsense though. She can produce 26.4 megawatts of unspeakable power. Just so we're clear, 2 megawatts of power is about enough to power 400 average homes. So the Titan class's power supply can comfortably give energy to over 5,000 homes. A very impressive beast. Some actually call them ugly, but I think they're kinda neat, not gonna lie. The Vernon C. Bain Correctional Center. That's a ship, is it?
It's a correctional center, but it's a ship? And yes. Well, no, actually. Technically, it wouldn't be a ship, as it has no propulsion of its own. It's a barge. A jail barge that is used to hold inmates for the New York City Department of Corrections. And already, this is the plot to someone's true crime dystopia novel. And I mean that literally. I am convinced that there are multiple novels with that very premise, a floating prison. And if there isn't, I will write it myself, because what? But yes, indeed, this is an 800-bed jail barge that is anchored off the Bronx's southern shore, across from Rikers Island. It was built for $161 million at Avondale Shipyard in Louisiana, along the Mississippi River near New Orleans, and brought to New York in 1992, specifically to reduce an overcrowding issue that Rikers Island was dealing with at the time. The barge was seen as a lower-cost alternative to constructing a new facility, and in that way it was. It was cheaper to build the barge than it was to buy land and build a building on it. It is actually the third time they've done this, and prison ships as a whole actually date back to at least the 1700s, when King George III, due to, again, a shortage of prison space in London, started utilizing ships to hold prisoners. While the concept is similar, it is important to mention that the Vernon Bain was, for one thing, built from the ground up to be a prison ship, and for two, does at least fit to more modern standards in terms of treating prisoners, well, still as prisoners, but less cruelly than I imagine they would have gotten if they were on a 1700s-style ship. In fact, the Vernon Bain entered the Guinness Book of World Records in 2014, as it was named by them to be the largest prison barge in operation, although she is destined for decommissioning, as of September 2023. Don't know what's gonna happen to her after that happens, though I can't imagine she'd be preserved. Maybe resold for the same purposes, or just flat out scrapped. It's hard to say with this kind of thing, but she definitely looks distinctive, and her role is pretty distinctive too, especially in the modern day. The Sea-Based X-Band Radar, or SBX-1, is a floating, self-propelled, mobile, active, electronically scanned array early warning radar station. Yes! Absolutely! Now that's what we're looking for with some mad science nonsense! And looking at her, she doesn't even look like a ship. I mean, does she move? Is she another barge? Well, no, she's not. She can move under her own power, hence self-propelled, and she's meant to operate in high winds and heavy seas, developed as a part of the United States Department of Defense Missile Defense Agency's, or MDA, Ballistic Missile Defense System. Her perplexing appearance can be attributed to the fact that her radar dome, which is large and obvious, is mounted on a 5th generation CS-50 twin-hulled semi-submersible oil platform. So in case you were thinking she looks like she's on an oil platform, that's because she absolutely is. And she spends most of her time based at Akademik Island in Alaska, but she's also taken trips down to Pearl Harbor on occasion. Her role is simply that of a very powerful radar system, alerting the United States Defense Forces of potential threats so they'll have time to react. Yeah, we still remember what happened on Pearl Harbor when we ignored the radars or didn't know how they worked. We're not playing that game anymore. You're not touching our boats again. Not doing it. We're watching you. She's also lovingly referred to by the locals of Oahu as the golf ball. Because, really, you don't know why? I shouldn't have to explain that nickname. It's actually a very obvious one. The radar, just so we're clear, has a range of 2,000 kilometers, or 1,200 miles. Though, interestingly, most of her crew isn't military. A lot of them are civilian contractors. But I would imagine that's because she's not meant to be in a war zone. The SBX-1 can see so far that the idea of putting her in a place where she'd get shot at is absurd. She has no need to be there. The whole point of her is to spot enemies from very, very far away so actual warships can go and deal with the threat. And while she can move on her own, she can't move very fast, with only a top speed of 9 knots. That's just 10 miles per hour. But still, she serves a very vital purpose, and is still in service as I speak. The Havfarm 1. Is that even a ship? It's got holes in it. Is it not done? It looks kind of like an oil rig, but with just the frame? Well, this particular, ship, which is a word I'm gonna use very loosely to describe this particular creation, is the largest semi-submersible structure ever built, and the largest man-made structure to be transported on a heavy lifting vessel. This thing was designed by NSK Ship Design for Norwegian fishing company Nordlaks, and its purpose is actually quite a novel one. She is for fish farming, and she was built to actually get around some regulations when it came to restrictions on the fish farming industry over there. There are no rules for sea-going structures or ships, though Havfarm 1 is designed for sustainable fish farming. You may have read a few alarmist articles talking about how we are overfishing and we're gonna drive all the fish to extinction and then we're gonna starve, which seems like a gross exaggeration of what'll probably happen, but I generally do err on the side of conservation when it comes to such things, so any solution that prevents us from using too much of a single resource and therefore running out of said resource, whether it be animals, plants, or what have you, is fine by me, and indeed, this thing is designed to house up to 10,000 tons of salmon. And while she does have a small crew on board, a lot of the functions will be done from the shore, via Ethernet and Wi-Fi systems. She's also fitted with 6 Rolls-Royce Marine tunnel thrusters, for ensuring a sufficient flow of oxygen-rich seawater from the outside of the structure to the fish farming areas. It's all very industrialized, but well thought out, and while power to her is supplied from a shore connection, she does have onboard generators that are available to give her backup electricity for her to continue operations for at least a short time. She's a pretty innovative beast in terms of this particular industry, although there are a few animal rights groups that would argue against this because farming bad, how dare you eat animals, and Listen, look, it's one of those things, but I would argue that fish farming actually helps wild fish, because if you're farming the fish, well, the ones on the farms are the ones that get eaten. You leave the wild fish alone, and salmon are very delicate. They have very specific breeding patterns, and overfishing of them could really upset that practice. If this can effectively farm them instead, that would mean the wild salmon would be allowed to exist peacefully without us really bothering them as much. Either way, it's definitely an interesting idea, though the verdict's still out as to how well it's going to go, as this thing was only put out to the water just a few years ago. The Akademik Lomonosov. Did you need me to tell you this is Russian? Because with that name, I thought it was pretty obvious. Also, I'm cheating again, and I know, I've done it 3 times on this list, because technically this isn't a ship either. This is a non-self-propelled power barge. And from the outside looking in, she may not seem that crazy. She looks like kind of a building on a barge. That's not too exciting. So what's the deal? Well, you are looking at Russia's first
floating nuclear power station.
What? Really? Why? Well, this is for practical reasons, actually. The far northern regions of Russia are difficult to get consistent power to, as well as maintain because it's so cold, but the residents would really like power because it is, again, very, very cold. So the logic here is simply, alright guys, what if we made a nuclear power plant but made it so we could move it around? Hence the barge. And indeed, that is exactly what she does. She provides power to more rural areas that desperately need the extra energy via 2 KLT-40S nuclear reactors. They're actually derived from icebreaker propulsion reactors. Together, they provide about 300 megawatts. They use low-enriched uranium with a fuel cycle of 3 years. And she can work as a cogeneration plant as well, or a combined heat and power plant, by utilizing the waste heat from the reactors. That heat is collected, and as a result she can provide up to 60 megawatts of thermal power as well, via clamped pipelines, which is very useful in, again, the bitterly cold far north of Russia. It's one of those things that I gotta admit is a pretty neat idea, though it has undergone criticism, mostly from Greenpeace and the Bologna Foundation, who's like Greenpeace, another environmental group. The Bologna Foundation criticized the idea of a floating nuclear power plant, and Greenpeace criticized it because it may cause harm to a fragile environment that is already under enormous pressure from climate change, referring to it as a nuclear Titanic and Chernobyl on ice. Oh, horrific buzzwords! Someone stop the— Listen, guys, first of all, the owners of this particular thing, Rosatom, pointed this out, and I'll concur because they are correct. The PWR reactors they're using in this thing have basically nothing in common with the old RBMK reactors that were used at Chernobyl. And these new modern reactors are designed to shut down automatically without external power and human intervention in case of emergency. The design incorporates all the state-of-the-art safeguards. And I understand that, especially lately, we are kind of inclined not to trust Russia, but in their defense, they haven't had a major accident since Chernobyl, and honestly, it being floating is probably better. They also point out that many militaries, like ours, use nuclear power in ships, and have done so for decades. Our submarines, our new aircraft carriers, they all use nuclear power. This just happens to be a nuclear power plant, and provides the power to the shore. It doesn't transfer radiation to the shore via— it's just the electricity. If something did go wrong, worst case scenario, the water's freezing up there. They could literally sink it and it would probably be fine, because it would cool down almost immediately. I understand a lot of people in the modern day are still very scared of nuclear power and radiation, scary, but it's really a lot safer than people seem to think it is, especially when modern safety standards are in place. And I definitely think that the Akademik Lomonosov is a good idea in concept. It's providing electricity to people who desperately need it, who live in a very harsh climate. And remember, nuclear power doesn't actually produce any emissions to the atmosphere. So climate change really isn't a relevant discussion when it comes to this, because it doesn't produce any carbon. If you've ever seen a nuclear power plant and see the smoke coming out, that's just steam. It's true, nuclear power does produce nuclear waste, which is bad, and we have to deal with that, but it doesn't hurt the atmosphere directly. So really, I think the environmental groups are just jumping on it because nuclear's scary. Quick, write an article about it. That's where I'm at with the discussion. Interesting idea, though. Interesting. The Arya. What is that? What even is that? Well, for a while, no one seemed to know. There are a lot of different angles of this particular vessel. And for at least a few years online, back in the early 2000s, no one seemed to have a solid answer as to what in the blue heck this thing is. Or was, as the case may be. But, through some deep dives, I have finally found a solid answer. Her name was Arya, and she is, well, a ship, but she's an East German ship, built under what was known as Project 415. She was constructed in 1989 at a shipyard in East Germany. Her original purpose, as far as anyone seems to know, is that she was supposed to be some kind of spy ship. Though exactly how she would have carried out this task isn't clear, and it's not really clear how anyone saw anything or even how far along she was. Was she ever finished? I mean, she was obviously launched, but in terms of fitting out, I don't know, it's hard to tell. She doesn't have any windows on her. What the heck is going on here? She was confusing, is really what she was. In the 90s, she changed hands, and there were actually plans to turn her into a floating casino instead. Which, okay, that's a shift, but that didn't happen actually. She was never turned into this. And she would wind up sitting derelict in Turku, which is in Finland, for many years, until at least 2009. And it seemed like while she was there, it's when most people outside of the know started getting, well, curious about her, because the heck is that? She just looks so weird, and even now I don't have concrete information as to her general purpose or capabilities, whatever they would have been, as she was pretty much just abandoned. And in 2009, she was finally sent to Lithuania to be scrapped, as was her fate, which I think is a bit of a shame. Not because I know anything about her, but I think that's really why, though. I don't know anything about her. Like, someone tell me what she was. What was she supposed to do? Why does she look like that? Where are the windows? Is that a jet engine behind her? Like, there was even one post where someone thought this might be a prototype, a chronoplane that the Soviets were working on before they collapsed. I don't think that's the case. She doesn't really look like it to me. But, I mean, maybe she wasn't finished. There's a lot of unknowns with Arya, and I think Arya will remain a little bit mysterious from now until the end of time. But she definitely looks funny. Gotta give her that.